What if the money in your bank account is quietly disappearing even when the number doesn't change? You deposit $1,000. A year later, it still says 1,000. Nothing was stolen, no mysterious charge appeared, and yet that money can buy less. A smaller grocery cart, less gas, maybe one night at a hotel instead of two. So what happened? Most people have a one-word answer: inflation. But that's not really an explanation. It's just the name we give to the result. The deeper question is this: why is our money designed to lose purchasing power over time? To understand that, we need to return to one Sunday night in 1971, when President Richard Nixon appeared on television and interrupted America's regular programming. His announcement lasted only a few minutes, but it helped end one monetary era and begin another. And the most surprising part? Nixon didn't present it as a permanent transformation. He called it temporary. More than 5 decades later, we're still living with it. But this isn't a simple story about a president suddenly destroying sound money. The system was already cracking. The real mystery is why almost nobody could figure out how to save it. Our story begins before Nixon, in the summer of 1944. World War II was still raging. Cities had been destroyed, economies were shattered, and world leaders were already worried about what might happen when the fighting ended. They had seen this movie before. After World War I, countries fought economic battles with tariffs and currency devaluations. International trade weakened. The Great Depression spread misery across borders. That economic pain helped create the conditions for political extremism. Nobody wanted a repeat, so delegates from 44 countries gathered at a hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. Their goal was huge: build a more stable global financial system. The arrangement they created placed the U.S. dollar at the center. Other major currencies would maintain fixed exchange rates against the dollar. The dollar, meanwhile, would be convertible into gold for foreign monetary authorities at a fixed rate of $35 per ounce. In simple terms, the world would trust the dollar, and the dollar would point back to gold. Why America? Because the United States came out of the war in an extraordinary position. Its industrial base was powerful. Its territory had escaped the physical destruction experienced across Europe and Asia, and it controlled an enormous share of the world's official gold reserves. For a while, this new arrangement worked remarkably well. International trade expanded. Europe rebuilt. Japan became an industrial giant. Currencies were relatively stable. It looked like the financial architects at Bretton Woods had created something built to last. But hidden inside their design was a contradiction, a financial time bomb. For global trade to grow, countries needed dollars. They needed dollars to buy products, settle international payments, and support their own currencies. But how would the rest of the world get those dollars? America had to send them abroad through spending, investment, foreign aid, military commitments, and imports. There was just one problem. The more dollars that accumulated overseas, the harder it became for America to honor the promise behind them. Foreign governments were told their dollars could be exchanged for U.S. gold, but America's gold supply was limited. The number of dollars wasn't. An economist named Robert Triffin warned about this contradiction. If America restricted the flow of dollars, the world might not have enough liquidity to support growing trade. But if America kept supplying dollars, foreign governments might eventually realize there wasn't enough gold to redeem them all. It was like selling more tickets to a show than there were seats in the theater. That works until everyone arrives at the same time. And during the 1960s, people began arriving. The United States was spending heavily. It had military forces stationed around the world. It was fighting the Vietnam War. At home, the federal government was funding major social programs. More spending meant more dollars circulating inside and outside the country. Inflationary pressure was already growing. That point is important. The inflation story didn't suddenly begin after Nixon's announcement. The old system was under serious pressure before he appeared on television. Then France started asking uncomfortable questions. French President Charles de Gaulle argued that the dollar's special position gave America an enormous advantage. Other countries generally had to export goods or provide services to earn dollars. The United States could create the currency that everyone else needed. France began exchanging some of its dollar reserves for gold, and that created a dangerous signal. If France wanted gold instead of dollars, who might be next? Confidence is strange. It can survive years of bad news. Then one act of doubt changes everything. Other governments could see that foreign dollar claims were increasing while America's available gold was declining. The United States and its partners tried to defend the system. They cooperated in the gold market. They created temporary fixes. They changed some of the rules. But none of those actions solved the central contradiction. By 1971, the pressure had become impossible to ignore. On Friday, August 13th, President Nixon gathered senior economic advisors at Camp David. The meeting was kept quiet. They faced several bad options. America could reduce spending and tighten credit dramatically, but that risked unemployment and a painful recession. It could lower the dollar's official value against gold, but that would publicly admit the existing promise could no longer be maintained. Or it could stop converting foreign-held dollars into gold. That weekend, the administration chose the third option. On Sunday, August 15th, Nixon spoke to the country. He announced that the United States would suspend the dollar's convertibility into gold. The so-called gold window was closed. But wait, there was more. Nixon also announced a temporary freeze on wages and prices, along with new measures involving taxes and imports. Think about the message. The government was fundamentally changing the international monetary system while telling Americans that it was protecting them from higher prices. Nixon blamed speculators and framed the decision as a defense of the dollar. And once again, he described the suspension as temporary. It never ended. Attempts to rebuild the fixed exchange rate system followed, but they didn't last. Within a couple of years, major currencies were floating against one another. The dollar no longer represented a fixed claim on gold. A new monetary age had begun. This is where many versions of the story become too simple. They say the dollar had been real because it was connected to gold. Then, overnight, it became worthless paper. But that's not quite right. Modern dollars are supported by the American economy, the government's taxing power, financial markets, laws, contracts, institutions, and, most importantly, public confidence. You accept dollars because you believe other people will accept them. Employers pay salaries in dollars. Businesses price products in dollars. Taxes are paid in dollars. Debts are settled in dollars. So the dollar wasn't backed by nothing, but something crucial had changed. The external restriction was gone. Under the new system, the supply of money and credit would be managed primarily through policy and human judgment. That created flexibility. It also created temptation. The years that followed were rough. Inflation accelerated. Then, oil shocks pushed energy costs dramatically higher. And energy doesn't affect only the price at the gas station. Oil is connected to transportation, manufacturing, farming, packaging, heating, and shipping. When energy becomes more expensive, the pressure can spread through almost everything. America entered a period of stagflation. High inflation combined with weak growth and unemployment. Prices rose. Workers demanded higher wages. Businesses faced higher costs. Consumers began expecting prices to keep climbing. That expectation became part of the problem. People spent sooner because waiting could mean paying more later. Businesses raised prices partly because they expected their own expenses to rise. Inflation was no longer just an economic number. It had become a behavior. Eventually, the Federal Reserve fought it with extremely high interest rates. That helped bring inflation down, but the treatment hurt. Borrowing became expensive. Businesses struggled. Unemployment increased. Home financing became punishing. The country discovered something important. A government can create money quickly. Rebuilding confidence is much harder. So if gold no longer supported the international monetary system, why did countries continue using dollars? Oil played a role, but not in the magical way it's sometimes presented online. During the 1970s, America strengthened its economic and security relationship with Saudi Arabia. Oil revenues flowed into dollar-denominated investments, including U.S. government debt. Because much of the international oil market operated in dollars, countries that imported energy had a strong reason to obtain and hold them. But oil didn't literally replace gold. You couldn't take your dollars to Washington and demand barrels of petroleum. The dollar survived for broader reasons. America had a massive economy. Its financial markets were deep and accessible. Global trade was already organized around the dollar, and there wasn't an obvious replacement capable of taking over the entire system. Gold had acted like an anchor. The new dollar system operated more like a giant network, and the larger a network becomes, the harder it is to leave. Now we can return to the original question. Why does your money lose purchasing power? Modern central banks typically aim for low, positive inflation, not permanently frozen prices. A small amount can sound harmless, but it compounds. If prices rise by around 3% every year, they can roughly double over about 24 years. No dramatic currency collapse is required. The change happens quietly, and it doesn't affect everyone equally. People who own homes, businesses, land, or stocks may see the dollar value of those assets increase. People whose wealth sits mainly in cash can lose purchasing power. Borrowers with fixed-rate debt may repay their loans using less valuable future dollars. Workers suffer when their pay increases more slowly than their living costs. But we also need to be honest. Not every expensive product can be blamed entirely on the end of gold convertibility. Housing prices are also shaped by supply shortages, zoning restrictions, land values, construction costs, population growth, and interest rates. Healthcare and education have their own complicated systems. Modern cars contain safety equipment and technology that didn't exist decades ago. Globalization, automation, taxes, regulations, productivity, and corporate competition all influence prices and wages. There isn't one villain. That's what makes the real story harder and more important. Closing the gold window gave policymakers more freedom to respond to recessions, banking crises, and emergencies. That flexibility can prevent a financial panic from becoming a complete economic collapse. But every rescue can create new risks. Governments may borrow instead of making painful choices. Investors may take bigger chances if they expect intervention during a crisis. Debt can grow faster than the economy supporting it. The system becomes more flexible and more dependent on trust. That's the trade-off. Gold created discipline, but gold-based systems could also produce brutal deflation and deepen economic pain. Fiat money gives governments room to act, but it can encourage debt, inflation, and short-term thinking. There was never a perfect monetary system, only different ways for one to fail. Nixon's announcement didn't empty anyone's wallet that night. It changed something less visible. It moved the responsibility for monetary restraint away from a scarce metal and placed it in human hands. That experiment continues every time the government borrows, the Federal Reserve changes interest rates, or another crisis requires an emergency response. So, the next time you notice that your grocery bill has climbed again, remember, the number printed on money isn't the same as its value. Value depends on what that money can buy. And ultimately, the dollar is supported by something both incredibly powerful and dangerously fragile: our shared belief that the promise will still mean something tomorrow.